Sometimes life can feel like a quiet tug-of-war between what we hope for and what we actually experience. We pray, we try, we push forward, and yet something still feels stuck. Deep down, many people wonder why God's blessing seems distant or why certain doors don't open the way they expected. And the truth is, God isn't stingy, distant, or uninterested. But sometimes, without realizing it, we create barriers, spiritual, emotional, or practical, that make it harder for us to receive what God is willing and ready to give. This isn't about shame or guilt. It's about awareness, growth, and stepping into the life God actually intended. The Bible is full of wisdom that teaches us how the condition of our heart, the posture of our mind, and the patterns we carry can either open the flow of God's blessing or quietly hold it back. So let's go deeper into the kind of things that can stand in the way of God's best for us, and how we can release them so His goodness has room to move in our lives. There is something powerful about the way the heart holds onto experiences, especially the painful ones. When someone hurts us or leaves an emotional scar, it becomes easy to grip that pain tightly, almost as if holding onto it protects us from ever feeling that way again. But the Bible paints a different picture. Forgiveness, though difficult and sometimes slow, is a path toward freedom rather than a dismissal of the past. Unforgiveness doesn't just sit quietly in a corner, it grows, taking root in our thoughts, emotions, and relationships. It shapes the atmosphere within us, and even though it feels like a shield, it works more like a prison. Many people don't realize that letting go of resentment is not about excusing the person or erasing the memory. It's about releasing the weight that keeps you from moving forward. It's about clearing the emotional clutter so God's peace and strength have room to settle in. When the heart unclenches, blessings don't have to fight through layers of bitterness. They simply flow where openness exists. The Bible's call to forgive isn't a harsh demand. It's an invitation to healing. The way we respond to God's guidance also shapes the pathways of blessing. Life is full of choices, and sometimes we drift into habits that aren't healthy or decisions that we know aren't aligned with what God has spoken. Not out of rebellion necessarily, but sometimes out of fear, comfort, or a desire to stay in control. Yet the Bible often emphasizes that blessing is connected to obedience, not as a reward system, but as a natural result of alignment. When advice, direction, or correction is ignored, the consequences aren't punishments. They're simply the outcome of walking against the grain of wisdom. Think of it like walking against strong wind. It's tiring, frustrating, and it slows everything down. But when we step back into alignment, things begin to flow more smoothly. God's guidance is meant to protect, steer, and equip us, not restrict us. Even small decisions to respond to God's nudges can open unexpected doors, and the beauty is that God doesn't expect instant perfection. What He honors is a willing heart, a heart that says, "I'm trying, help me take the next step." That posture alone clears space for blessing to grow. One area that is often overlooked but incredibly powerful is the way we speak. Words are not just noises we push into the air. They shape perspectives, attitudes, and beliefs. The Bible describes words as having the ability to bring life or death, and that idea holds true even in everyday life. When someone consistently speaks negatively about themselves, their future, their family, or their circumstances, it subtly trains their mind to expect disappointment. It also influences how others feel around them. Complaining, criticizing, or focusing on everything that's wrong creates an atmosphere where hope struggles to breathe. But when someone chooses to speak with gratitude or hope, even in small ways, it shifts the emotional climate. It doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means framing reality with faith rather than fear. Many blessings are missed not because God didn't offer them, but because the mindset shaped by negative words made it impossible to recognize or appreciate them. Speaking life isn't about pretending everything is great. It's choosing to give your heart and mind something healthy to build from. The posture of humility is another powerful element that influences whether blessing can thrive. Pride is often misunderstood. It's not always arrogance or boasting. Sometimes it appears as stubborn self-reliance, hesitation to ask for help, or the belief that you must always figure everything out on your own. The Bible consistently shows that God gives grace to the humble, not because humility earns something, but because humility keeps the heart open. Pride closes doors. It shuts out community, wisdom, and divine guidance. When someone insists on carrying burdens alone, they unintentionally block the support and blessing that God often sends through people, opportunities, or unexpected direction. But humility makes space for God to work in ways we don't see coming. It's a quiet, steady posture that says, I don't have all the answers, and that's okay. Humility doesn't diminish strength. It expands it by grounding it in God rather than in personal control. A humble spirit can see possibilities that pride would overlook. Another barrier comes from hidden struggles that stay locked in the shadows. Every person faces temptations, weaknesses, or habits that they wish they could erase. But when these battles remain unspoken and unaddressed, they create a heavy internal divide. The Bible shows that secrecy drains the soul, not because God is waiting to punish, but because hidden things have a way of growing stronger in the dark. Shame and secrecy go hand in hand, and they isolate the heart from the support, healing, and restoration that God offers. Bringing struggles into the light, whether that means honest prayer, confiding in someone trustworthy, or seeking help, is not a sign of failure. It is the starting point of freedom. God doesn't bless perfection. He blesses honesty. He works powerfully in the lives of those willing to say, I need help with this. When the pressure of pretending lifts, the heart becomes lighter, clearer, and more open to God's renewing work. All of these internal barriers, unforgiveness, misalignment, negative speech, pride, and secrecy, form a kind of spiritual clutter. They fill the inner space where blessing is meant to settle. And just like a room that hasn't been cleaned in years, that clutter makes it difficult to move freely, think clearly, or breathe deeply. But when these layers begin to be addressed, even gently and gradually, the entire atmosphere of a person's life shifts. Blessings don't always appear as sudden miracles. Often they come as clarity, peace, opportunities, renewed strength, restored relationships, healthier thoughts, and quiet breakthroughs that accumulate over time. Blessing grows in the soil that has been cleared, watered, and opened to God. The process of removing these internal barriers often begins with a simple willingness to acknowledge what's happening beneath the surface. Many people go years carrying unforgiveness without naming it, thinking they've moved on simply because time has passed. But emotional wounds don't obey the clock. They obey intentional healing. The Bible encourages forgiveness not to minimize pain, but to prevent pain from becoming a permanent filter on life. When someone chooses to release bitterness, even if the process is slow, they make space for emotional freedom. And with freedom comes clarity. New relationships feel lighter, old memories lose their sting, and the heart becomes less defensive. In that openness, God's blessing doesn't feel distant anymore. It feels like something returning to its rightful place. Forgiveness is both the hard work of the soul and the gentle work of grace. Realignment with God's guidance is another area where blessing quietly expands. People often think of obedience as rigid rule, following, but the Bible's portrayal is far more relational. God's instructions are meant to safeguard purpose, identity, and peace. When a person chooses to follow God's direction, whether in relationships, integrity, generosity, or daily habits, the natural outcome is stability. Life doesn't become perfect, but it becomes grounded, and grounded people weather storms more effectively. They see opportunities more clearly. They avoid pitfalls that used to trip them. Blessing often comes disguised as wisdom, and wisdom grows through alignment with God. Each choice to follow His leading becomes a seed that eventually turns into fruit, sometimes unexpectedly. A small act of obedience today can become a door of blessing tomorrow. Words continue to play a significant role in shaping the atmosphere of blessing. When people speak hope, faith, and gratitude, it doesn't just uplift them emotionally, it trains the mind to look for God's activity rather than assuming His absence. Gratitude opens the eyes to blessings that were already there but overlooked. Hope creates the resilience needed to endure hard moments and still believe in brighter days. Faith, inspired speech isn't about denying reality. It's about refusing to let fear be the loudest voice. Many breakthroughs begin with the decision to speak differently. When someone shifts from "nothing ever works out for me" to "I believe God is working even when I can't see it," the internal emotional climate changes. And that climate becomes fertile ground where blessing naturally takes root, because expectation influences perception and perception influences action. Humility continues to be a theme throughout Scripture because it softens the heart in ways pride never can. A humble person doesn't need to pretend they have everything handled. They don't view vulnerability as weakness. They don't fear asking for help or admitting when something is too heavy to carry alone. Humility draws people in rather than pushing them away. It makes room for wise voices, healthy accountability, and supportive community. In that openness, God often sends blessing through relationships, unexpected encouragement, or doors that open because someone saw potential. Pride isolates, but humility connects, and blessing often flows through connection. A humble heart is teachable, receptive, and willing to grow, which makes it an ideal place for God to pour new strength, new opportunities, and new levels of purpose. Hidden struggles also affect how deeply blessing can settle into a person's life. When someone carries secret burdens, they often live in a constant state of internal tension, hoping God will bless them, but feeling unworthy or afraid that their hidden battle disqualifies them. But the Bible shows repeatedly that God works powerfully in transparency. Healing begins when someone stops hiding and starts inviting God into the mess. It might involve confession, accountability, counseling, or personal reflection, but the key is bringing the struggle into the light. Shame loses its power when exposed to truth and grace. Over time, the heart becomes lighter, the mind becomes clearer, and the spiritual atmosphere becomes healthier. In that lightness, blessings that once felt unreachable begin to feel possible because the person is no longer weighed down by internal conflict. God meets people in honesty more than in outward perfection. As these inner shifts occur, blessing begins to flow more naturally, not always in dramatic moments, but in subtle, steady transformation. Someone who once lived with resentment begins to notice joy returning. Someone who struggled with disobedience starts seeing new opportunities open as they align their choices with God's wisdom. Someone who lived with negative speech feels their mindset shifting toward hope. Someone who carried pride begins to enjoy deeper relationships and unexpected support. Someone who hid their struggles finds peace in the freedom that comes with honesty. These changes create a spiritual ecosystem where blessing thrives organically. God's blessing is not always a sudden event. More often, it is a gradual unveiling of what was always available but previously blocked. Blessings come in many forms. Sometimes they appear as renewed strength during difficult seasons. Sometimes they show up as restored relationships, answered prayers, or unexpected opportunities. Other times they come as inner peace, deeper faith, emotional healing, or the clarity to see life differently. The Bible teaches that God is generous, patient, and deeply invested in the well-being of His people. What often stands in the way is not God's reluctance, but the conditions of the heart. When those conditions shift, through forgiveness, alignment, healthier words, humility, and honesty, the channel of blessing widens. The beautiful truth is that none of these barriers need to remain permanently. Every person has the ability to start making these shifts, even slowly and imperfectly. God responds not to flawless execution, but to open-hearted intention. The journey toward receiving God's blessing is not about earning something. It's about removing what gets in the way of what God already desires to give. Little by little, as the heart becomes clearer and healthier, life begins to feel lighter. Hope becomes easier to grasp, faith becomes more natural, and blessing becomes not an occasional surprise, but a steady expression of God's presence.